So while I was in Malawi that first time, a lot happened. We were staying in the capital city of Lilongwe at Memory and Henry's house. As I said, Memory was 9 months pregnant and ready to pop at any second. And here she had this house full of people. Uh, she really is a remarkable woman. While I was there, she gave birth to Taloni, and I watched her and Henry, work so hard with this young family, this house full of guests, and driving back and forth to try to manage this enormous project, this school. And I don't know what the drive's like now because I haven't been back there for a while, but it took a whole hour to get out to that school at that time. It wasn't that far out of the capital city, but some of the roads weren't all that great, so it did take a bit of time to get there and back. So on that first visit, I spent a lot of time familiarizing myself with the culture and the people of Malawi. I started to make connections. I tried to build up trust. I tried to understand where the people were coming from. And I realized very quickly that I had taken on an awful lot. And I realized that one trip to Malawi was not going to be nearly enough to be able to understand Memory's situation and to be able to understand anything of the context of that situation. But during that time, I was able to interview a lot of women. I primarily interviewed women because that was the focus of this book. I knew that was going to be the focus of this book. I did start to think about structure. I think initially I thought, I'm just going to write the story of Memory Chizeza and everything will be hunky-dory. Wants me to do that, and I'll talk about her dreams and blah, blah, blah. And I realized very quickly that that would not do the story justice. For a North American person reading that story, I felt like they needed more context. I felt like they needed to understand the issues more to really comprehend the magnitude of what Memory was trying to do and how important what she was doing was as well. And out of that desire to make sense of a very complex situation, I started to develop this idea for the structure of this book, which I'll explain a little bit more later. So eventually I went home, and it was actually the following year, the following January, that the first school block was completed, and kind of by the skin of their teeth, the first group of girls went to school. This is Memory and Christy at the official opening, cutting the ribbon on the first school block. So I went back the next year, and this time I stayed at the school. And I started to not only learn more about Memory's life, but I started to interview more of the girls there and get a better sense of the whole situation. So that was in 2008, my second time in Malawi. I went back a third time the following year in 2009. And then at that point, I had spent hundreds of hours interviewing Malawian women, and some men too. I'd also spent hundreds and hundreds of hours researching, and I thought, okay, it is time. You need to get started on this writing. Enough dragging your heels. You need to get this thing done. And so that's basically what I did. So after those first 3 visits, I started doing some serious writing. I think by then I'd done a bit of writing, mostly standalone pieces. I'd done some outlining, but I hadn't really sat down and just really dug into it, which is what I needed to do. And what I realized I needed was some kind of structure. this was a really complex story. I wanted to somehow weave together these various elements. And, I'm pretty happy with what I ended up doing. It was quite ambitious. I'll try to give you a sense of what the structure looked like. So, when we're talking about structure within the creative nonfiction genre, we really want to, I want to emphasize that you need a structure that's going to enhance the storytelling. Why are you using this structure? How does it make the story better? How does it create meaning or understanding for the reader? Because if you're just shoehorning a story into a structure, that's not going to work. So here's what I did, and I've really simplified this significantly. But essentially, Memory Story was the narrative thread that runs through the entire book. So from the beginning to the end. The book opens with the opening of the school. And I scene set and I introduce some of the minor characters so that I can come back to them later. But the school opening is the opening of the book. And then we have a flashback. And the flashback goes back to Memory's childhood. The excerpt that you read about the history of the slave trade, and it opens with talking about Memory going to school in Kalanga. That is the flashback. And then from there, we move along somewhat chronologically, and we catch up to the present, and then we move on to the future. And so that is the thread that runs through the book. So what I did, it's almost like an extended braided essay in some ways. I used the various events that took place in Memory's life to as jumping off points to talk in more depth about specific issues. So for example, when I'm talking about Memory's childhood, I digress and start to talk about orphans and the issue of these many orphans at that time in Malawi. And then I digress again and talk about the AIDS epidemic and some of the factors that have contributed to the AIDS epidemic and so on. And so there will be a chapter that perhaps tells the story of a particular portion of Memory's life, and within that chapter there will be these digressions about these various issues that are important for understanding of the whole subject matter. And then between the chapters are standalone stories. So what I did with these standalone stories, for example, the story of Chifundo, was I took characters that had been introduced within the main story, within Memory Story, and I zoomed in as though I was coming in from a bird's eye view and zooming in on this one character and one moment of their life or a part of their life story. And really what I think that did was it allowed me to tell more than just Memory Story. Throughout the primary narrative of the book, I had to stick pretty much to Memory Story. But this really allowed me to elevate some of these other stories that I thought were very worthwhile as well. And I think that all of these stories, remember how I talked before about how important it is to choose material that enhances and layers the meaning that you're trying to get across. Well, that's what I tried to do with these standalone stories as well. So these standalone stories not only elevate these relatively minor characters and let us see a close-up of their life, but it also reinforces the major themes that I'm trying to get across in this book.